more miles to go with 3 other guys in a 29-foot boat was really starting to sink in. And then on the horizon, actually it wasn't even on the horizon. First I heard it. I heard the sound of splashing, and I had no idea what that is. And I stood up and I looked out of the horizon, and so I could see about 3 miles away, and there's a wall of white water that's traveling straight for us. And there's no wind, and this is kind of blowing my mind through this haze of exhaustion and feeling seasick. I call all the guys out, and they have no idea either, and it gets closer and closer. And finally we realize what it is. It's dolphins. There's thousands of them. And we were experiencing something that was known as a super pod, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a huge amount of dolphins, thousands. And started to make things a little bit better, a little bit, kind of verified the reasons that we were out there to experience some pretty extraordinary stuff. And also some scary stuff. We were cruising along. Sometimes we get a little bit too close to ships for comfort. And along that trip, we also had the challenge of, one of the mistakes we made on land came to haunt us out there, and that was not having enough food. So between the 4 of us, we lost a collective 145 pounds. So you might think that we would be deterred to want to go out to the ocean again, but it's a beautiful, fascinating place. And a few years later, we partnered with the Canadian Wildlife Federation and did the CWF Africa and the Americas expedition from Dakar, 3,600 miles to Miami, so about 400 miles longer than our last trip. And this was, the first one was a race, and the second one we wanted to have a more applicable reason. And we realized from that first trip that we learned so much, and it was very fun to share that afterwards. And we figured, well, we can probably do that a little bit better. And so that's where Or Northwest turned from this amateur racing organization into an educational organization that it is today. So we left, we left Dakar 2 Januaries ago, so January 2013, and made our way out across the Atlantic for the second time. Life at sea is rough. This right here are the bathroom facilities. So it can get pretty emotional out there at times when a threat of waves threatens to tear your bathroom away from you. But there are good times too. This is just one of the chores that we had to do while we were out there. This is me cleaning the boat. So you'll see these, that's a flying fish that jumped ahead. So we're going so slow that little gooseneck mussels are growing on the bottom of the boat. While we're rowing, flying fish are flying into the boats. And we had expected to see flying fish out there, and they were anywhere from 8 inches to just a few inches long. And when they were about 2-3 inches long, they'd land on the deck, and I just pick them up off and start chewing away and spit out the wings. And it was really the only fresh food we had out there, and it was pretty delicious. One thing we weren't expecting to fly out on our deck was squid. So it turns out that flying squid are a thing. They do exist. And whereas flying fish will fly up to 4 football fields up over the waves, these flying squid will fly up to about a football field long. And they look like little silver blue arrows jetting across the boat. And we're rowing along later in the trip, and these a bunch of them just flew overhead. We thought they were flying fish, and then they landed on deck, and they were inking everywhere. And like a lot of things that end up on our deck, we would eat them too, and it was delicious. We did not eat the whales. We don't promote the eating of whales in any way, shape, or form. But if you ever get the chance to, I would recommend swimming with whales. This is a fin whale. This perspective, so the boat is 29 feet long. That dagger board is maybe about 5 feet tall. That whale is about 80 to 90 feet. Absolutely massive. And they were beautiful creatures, and they were very sneaky too. They would show up, we'd get very excited, and we'd pull out all the camera equipment, and they would disappear. So this is one of the few times where we were able to hop in the water, swim with them, and actually get a little bit of footage.
What would the depth difference be from your boat to the whale?
So the depth difference between the boats, well, it would vary. They would be, as close as 50 feet away when they would surface. I believe that picture is probably about 200 to 400 feet away. It's really hard to tell, but the water in there is very, very clear. When you look down beneath you, you're not seeing any murkiness to the water. You're just seeing the absence of light. So going back to that picture, you can see it gets darker and darker. So that light is traveling really far down, and then it just turns into this black void. Rainbows, of course. You see rainbows at sea the way you see rainbows on land. One thing we weren't expecting was at midnight in one of our 4-hour shifts to see a moon travel overhead and a squall pass and then a gray rainbow appear. And so when you have the right conditions, you can see rainbows at midnight, and they're caused by the sun reflecting off the moon, and the same process that happens with rainbows, except it's a rainbow in grayscale. So after 72 days at sea, things were moving along. We were about 3,000 miles into our trip, and we were finally getting wind in the right direction. It had been a rougher trip than expected. Even our scientists were pretty flummoxed by the fact that we just weren't getting really good winds that were predicted for the area. And on day 72, we finally had a good downwind run. We just finished a shift change. Right in the middle of that shift change, 2 waves that were shaped very differently from the normal waves that we saw out there. They were shaped like squares. They wound around the back of the boat, dumped about 4,000 pounds of water on the deck, and then another wave, just a little bit bigger. And these are about 6 feet and flat, so they weren't huge waves. They were just oddly shaped. And it spun the boat into the sea. This is the picture that I made in the sanatorium afterwards. But we were upside down in the middle of the ocean. We had our personal locator beacons, and we flipped those on, and within 3 hours, 4 hours, the Coast Guard was able to fly over us. They took these shots, counted how many people were in the boat, and they dropped a barrel on us that had a VHF radio, and we were able to, actually the VHF radios that we're using to talk to the barges on this trip, and confirmed that there were 4 of us. And then they sent the closest ship to come pick us up. So this is the Hygiene, and this is a 580-foot car carrier. It's about 90 to 100 feet tall and about 100 feet wide. And you can see, so taking that into account, you can see this is where we had to crawl into. So that was close to 30 to 40 feet tall. And we had to do that on a rope ladder. That car carrier can hold 4,000 cars. Absolutely massive. So all of us ended up getting safe. Pat got a really good scar out of the situation. But other than that, we were unharmed. And throughout the whole thing, having this education program that was going on, that was a success, even though our trip across ended up being, we ended up not making it to Miami. Keep going. Yeah. So that brings us to the Mississippi River. That seems like a big segue, but and it is. So the Mississippi River. Why would we jump from oceans to this? And, well, I mean, there's a lot of water out here to row. And we wanted to do an educational adventure, and we could create that was repeatable. And talk about rowing across the ocean, and it's hard for a lot of people to imagine themselves doing that. But a lot of people imagine themselves being on the river, whether it's for a day or a week or a weekend. And there was enough adventure here to really use this as a good educational tool, and one that we felt was very important. So you can see here, this is the Mississippi watershed. It's huge. It's most of the continental United States and some of Canada. And so everything that's liquid that is poured down a drain, that is flushed, all ends up right there in the Gulf. And so this waterway is incredibly important. It's like the artery of the country. And what's happened in this area has really, has helped create how people identify as a nation and even as a continent. A lot of the history that happened in this area is a shared history with the entire continent as well. So we wanted to study that. And here we are up at the headwaters in Lake Itasca, and you can see right here that you can wade across it. And you can actually walk across it, and if you're careful, you could not even get your feet wet. And if you wanted to stand up in there, it would probably go up to your knees. So in terms of water volume per second, you guys have seen those shipping containers that are either on trains or on trucks. If you were to fill one of those up with the flow in here, it would take 20 minutes to fill one of those. By the time it gets to St. Anthony's Falls, 480 miles later, which is still in the, it's in Minneapolis, still in the state of Minnesota, 3 semi-truck every second in terms of the amount of volume that's flowing down. So this river starts from this very tiny little rivulet, mighty in a relatively short amount of time, and it takes a very course to do so. So this is the first or second day right out of Alaska, and you can see what I love about this is the scale. Now, if you're going to go out and hang out in the museum afterwards, you're going to see this incredible, massive map of a satellite image. And what I'd love for you to do is look at where it is up in Itasca at the very tip, and see if you can see this kind of detail. And then go down to Louisiana and check out it's the same shape of bends, but the scale is completely different. And you can see right here, those little, where the green looks a little bit darker, those are oxbows where the Mississippi used to roam, and eventually got cut off. So, if you look down again at that big satellite picture, you're going to see some areas of big oxbow lakes that are miles long down there on the southern part of the river. Eventually it turns into some incredible woodland forest with some pine and some deciduous trees, and here we are navigating our way through this. There's a lot of dams up there. There's 12 human-built dams and probably another 3 dozen beaver dams or perhaps more, and here we are going over those. The widest part of the Mississippi, arguably, is Lake Winnie, which is the first 60 miles of the trip. It's about 14 miles long and 11 miles wide, and it means muddy, troubled waters. So crossing it in a tiny canoe is something that can be pretty exciting in terms of, we're going to talk about the scale of the ocean rowboat in the ocean or the canoe in the on Lake Winnie. And so we had a very calm day, but once we got towards the end, there were about 2-foot waves that were surfing us to the other side of the lake, and that was a calm day. Along the way, we met a lot of new friends, and we met some wonderful people along every stretch of the river that have been very willing to help and offer things to help make our journey more comfortable and reach out to more students and people. The river that we have seen for the most part thus far, and especially on the section above Minneapolis, is very, very healthy. We see lots of bugs, lots of frogs, and frogs are a good indicator of river health because they have porous skin. And there are sections where we would portage, and we would pull out all of our gear, start walking through the grass, and it was like the grass would start to leap. There were so many. And this little guy found his way in our canoe, and we got him to safety after we got a few shots. Eagles. In this area, I grew up in New Mexico and the Seattle area. I've never seen this many eagles. I was very excited for the first 3 weeks of the trip and took a picture of every single eagle I saw. And then I realized how silly that was because there were so many. And a lot of people in this audience will remember when eagles were very endangered, and a lot of you younger folks are not going to remember that. But, it's extraordinary to see when well managed how a species can rebound. So what happened is you had a chemical called DDT, which was really good at killing bugs, which was great because mosquitoes are not much fun at all. But it also makes eagles' shells very thin, and it was killing a bunch of eagle chicks, enough to make eagles become endangered. And so the fact that you can take eagles for granted going down the river is something that's pretty extraordinary, and it's definitely one of those times where a very high success of managing resources. Along the way, we've seen a lot of these mayflies. I know a lot of people have to shovel these, and I'm sure that if I had to shovel them, I would be less fascinated with them. But on an evening, paddling away up there, we saw these beautiful white little mayflies, and they looked like these tiny little fairies or ballerinas that were dancing for the one day of life before they went back and joined the life cycle. I'm also pretty obsessed with the amount of shells in this area. I just don't imagine seeing shells this big and this thick in the middle of the continent. Growing up along the coast in Seattle, you go to beaches that are just littered with oyster shells, and that's something that's common. But going to beaches where you have so many of these thick clams is something completely unexpected. But when you hear about the pearl button industry here, it starts to make a lot more sense, and you start to realize, oh, that's how a lot of people could make a living at one point. The upper part of the river is this fascinating place, and mainly because it feels so remote. There's just sections where you feel like you might as well be the only people in the world in some kind of untouched Eden, and then suddenly you get closer and you realize that this is a landscape that people are living and working, and here's a power plant that's providing power to most of northern Minnesota. After 16 days, we made it to Minneapolis, and we transferred from our first set of locks, and had to stop our portaging, which was nice. And we said goodbye to our canoes and got into our rowboats. And rowboats because we're rowers and we like to row, and they're a lot more comfortable and they can handle some bigger waves. So I was blown away by that upper section, and I was thinking, well, how could it, how's it going to change below Minneapolis? How could it change as much as it has in this short amount of time? And once again, I was very, very pleasantly surprised. The Mississippi, in my imagination a year ago, even though that I'd read about it, was not one with 500-foot bluffs above it that stretch through this huge section of area that includes Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. And this section right here, it's called the Driftless. And about 12,000 years ago, when the Mississippi was forming, there were two ice sheets that were on either side of this area, and they just happened to avoid this one little section. And so this area has been formed predominantly by just the river. So a lot of these areas right here are what America was like 12,000 years ago. I've never seen so many pelicans, again, growing up along the coast. That's a pretty wild thing. And it's not just pelicans, it's tons of different birds. You see seagulls, and these birds, they go all the way up to northern Canada, all the way to South America. And if this was not maintained as a habitat, these birds would just have no place to go, and they would just cease to exist if they couldn't make those stops along the way. So this is a flyway that has not just important to the United States, it's important to Canada, it's important to countries and the world. Growing up where I did not see a lot of deciduous trees, and I think a lot of people here, anybody here grow up in a place that didn't have deciduous trees? You got one back there? So this is the first fall in my 32 years that I've really seen the colors change. And that is an extraordinary thing that happens every single year. And that has just been a real treat. On the lower river, we definitely start to see a lot more industry, and also some massive rope swings. We have seen rope swings the whole way down, but they seem to be getting bigger and bigger, just like the river, so I can't wait to see the ones that are down in New Orleans. I imagine they'll be absolutely massive. Throw us all the way in the middle of the river. And this set of 27 locks and dams that are maintained so that the river can be used as essentially a third coast. And so you look at that watershed and you think all the water that's flowing in that watershed eventually reaches the Gulf. And it's a mirror of everything that's built, everything that's grown in this area as well, all makes its way to the Mississippi. And because of these navigation channels, $180 billion worth of goods travels down the Mississippi in those barges that you see along the way. So just to think about that on a national and global scale, there's a drought, and those barges have to carry 25% less stuff. And what's 25% of 180 billion? It's a huge, huge amount. And there's things that there's a give and take. We can have this open for navigation, and that makes things difficult for a lot of the nature around here too. That makes this place extraordinary. And trying to balance these things is something that the Mississippi is always going to have a challenge with as long as there's humans here. As we've traveled down this, we've kind of said goodbye to that high river up in the north, and it's definitely, as things get a little bit lower, we start to see things that remind me of my first experience with the Mississippi, which is probably like a lot of yours, was Tom Sawyer. And seeing this up in Prairie du Chien kind of felt like a very surreal experience. I feel like we're going to start to get more of that as we head further south. We have, I think at this point, just under 2,000 miles to go, and we are very, very excited to see what else we're going to learn and how our opinions will form and change. And we would like you guys to follow along. This is rowboatclassroom.org, and what we're doing is we have this is where all of our education program is. We have a live interactive map, so you can see that's the upper section of the river right there. You can actually see there's a little video of an eagle. So as we're going down, we're taking pictures and videos, and we're interacting with folks along the way. And what we would like to see is, if you want to go to this map, we want you to input a point and put a picture or video of something that you've experienced on the river. Because this is something that was very foreign to me, but as we've talked to people on different sections of the river, there's a lot of the river that is foreign to a lot of people, even if they've grown up and know their section of the river really, really well. And at the end of this trip, we want to try and show as complete a picture as we can through our eyes and everybody else's participation in it. So thank you guys very much, and happy to take your questions. You guys got any questions? Any online, Greg?
We will certainly take questions from the visiting class online, and I can relay them to Jordan.
Yes? What do we do for the constant exposure that we have at sea? We have really good sunscreen, and we wear long sleeve shirts and wide brim hats, and that's really you have about 4 hours out of the day where you have some really high sun, and you just drink a lot of water and put on sunscreen multiple times. And really, the only way to fight the sun is to wear some long sleeve clothes. Yes, sir.
How do you? Fresh water. You don't drink in Mississippi, so how do you gauge each day? What with the boat and what you need to have in terms of food and water.
So the question is fresh water and provisions. How do we do that while we're on the Mississippi? Because the Mississippi has a bunch of towns along the way, for the most part, we're able to get fresh water from taps. And we have water bags on the river we would filter. But there's stuff that you can't filter out of the water with our little pump that we could. And actually, saying that, even though we filtered, I got some giardia on the upper river, and only recently got rid of that. Provisioning, that's something that, again, when we go into towns, we just go to grocery stores, and you get food that's most of the food in the middle part of the grocery store keeps really well.
Question from Mr. Hansen's class online. When you were traveling on the ocean, did you see any sharks?
When we were traveling in the ocean, did we see any sharks? In about 150 days at sea in a row, 3 sharks. So the closest one was probably...
Ocean again?
Will I try to row across the ocean again? Yes, I would love to row across the ocean. It is such an incredible, I think about it just about every day, and would love to get out there again.
You try that.
I want to do a trip around the world, so it would include... How did we get the boat out of the water? The one that flipped? That's an excellent question. The Canadian Wildlife Federation stood by us, and because of that, we were able to mount an expedition to go get it, and with their support and a lot of luck, craft and a 100-foot tugboat, and we located and were able to pull it out of the water. And because of that, you guys go to, if you just Google the words capsize and Dateline, we have a full hour on Dateline that you can watch. And when you go to that, you'll see footage that was rescued from the middle of the ocean that wouldn't have existed if we hadn't been able to do that.
How much equipment you?
Fortunately, the science equipment that was very expensive, that's all meant to run wet, so that survived. We lost a little bit of, we did lose a device called the CTV, which measures the temperature and salt in a water column, and that was, but we were able to get the boat back, and that can be repaired, and all the major scientific equipment. And we did lose a little bit of data, but we got a lot left that's been in a few PhD papers. Correct.
Another question coming in from online. Have you ever been attacked by any territorial animals?
Have we ever been attacked by any territorial animals? There was a leatherback sea turtle that was about 7 feet across that didn't really seem too keen on our boat, and so he showed up. And we're not a maneuverable boat by any means, and the turtle is a lot more maneuverable than we are. So it's not like we're trying to chase after him, because we really can't chase anything. And he got right up next to us and hit our boat 2 times, and yeah. Other than that, the animals seem very either indifferent or curious. Yes?
How many whales did you see?
How many whales did I see? That's a great question. We probably that. It's hard to say, because you'll see a little fin come out of the water. We saw thousands of dolphins. On both trips we saw superpods, but then the other trips with the big whales, we've probably seen dozens of those.
There's that pod of pilot whales in 2006.
There was a pod of pilot whales that was about 40 pilot whales, and those are actually some of the biggest of the dolphins, and they're about 20 feet long. They have these big bulbous heads that are full of fat that helps with their sonar, and so they'll dive down, they'll take a deep breath, and they'll go down to about 3,000 feet, and then they will sprint back and forth and chase squid, and that's how they hunt. And when they come to the surface, there's an activity that they do called loafing, which is just lying on the surface because they're catching their breath, and they're so tired after diving 3,000 feet and then sprinting. Question online?
Do you ever have to upgrade your boats?
Do we ever have to upgrade our boats? Yes. So rowing across the ocean is extremely hard on everything. There's things that, even if they're stainless steel, they're going to rust a little bit. Electronics get chewed up by the salt water. We're very close to the ocean, and so you look at something like the Haijin, that big ship. That needs to be painted every